If the problem can be solved with money, it's not a problem, it's an expense. Hurokshiza. Lord Baal, may I come in? Yes, come in, Alice. I give the command to open a door and stand up to meet my charge.
In general, the issue of providing political asylum for a human girl on the territory of the alien embassy on Babylon was resolved unexpectedly quickly and simply. Literally 2 days later, when Commander Sinclair, Ivanova, and Mr. Garibaldi finished with their problems over Branmer's missing body, the lieutenant came to me and handed over a small stack of documents, confirming that the Earth's representation on the station in the person of Sinclair allows the minor Alice Belden to apply to the ambassador of the Goa'uld Empire for political asylum and guardianship. There was also a statement from Alice herself and a paper on my behalf confirming the girl's status on my territory. This bureaucratic red tape was carried out quickly and with obvious rich experience in such paper dances. The girl was placed in one of the neighboring cabins located in the same corridor with my apartments, albeit slightly violating protocol. However, for some unknown reason, well, I can't be that scary, sometime after my announcement at the station, my neighbors asked Sinclair to move their residences to other parts of the sector, so Alice had a place to stay. I hope I'm not disturbing you? The telepath who entered stopped a little uncertainly, having barely stepped over the threshold. No, everything is fine, I note invitingly towards the chair, sitting down at the table myself, casting a quick glance towards Korone, who only slightly twitched her ear at the guest and continued to do justice to another basket of sweets. Are you settled in okay? Yes, but... Alice stopped mid-sentence, looking around at the picture that opened up. Isn't this too much? What do you mean? I smile, raising an eyebrow. Well, the girl shook her head, focusing her attention on me and, it seems, asking not quite what she wanted. I'm like a criminal. But not only did I ask for asylum from an entire ambassador, but I'm practically living in the embassy sector in the embassy cabin. This, Alice spread her hands. Well, Lieutenant Ivanova settled you in. I can't say anything about that. As for the shelter, it didn't cost me anything, and besides, it could be useful to both of us. Are you sure it is rational to speak so directly? Of course, I'm not going to reveal all my plans to her. I respond to Korone, who, as usual, butted into the conversation. But it's also not worth treating her like a child, which she essentially is. It's your business. Although you, as always, irrational and illogical, I finished the sentence for Korone, but nevertheless, it works. And stop looking at her so sternly, you're scaring the child. In response, Liladen only twitched her ears irritably, busily taking aim and nipping at another miniature pastry. Moreover, she did it with such concentrated importance and seriousness, as if she was not eating sweets but at least inspecting a maximum security prison. Which indeed made Alice a little nervous. Useful? Have to give her credit, the girl frowned, cast a tense glance in the direction of her assistant, but still returned to her conversation with me. Of course, I nod, making a house-like gesture with my fingers in front of my face. All relationships between intelligent beings are built on mutual benefit and advantage. If someone says otherwise, you can be absolutely sure that they are blatantly lying to you. And what do you want from me? Nothing special. As you already know, my species is not susceptible to your method of contactless thought exchange. Meanwhile, your telepathy is quite an interesting thing, so I would simply be curious to study it. To be honest, I did not plan to deal with this issue in the near future, but since everything worked out so well, even my assistant will not be able to accuse me of misuse of resources and official position for personal purposes, and she, believe me, will try. I smile dreamily, closing my eyes. In short, I would be grateful to you for help in this matter. Even if in this particular case you act wisely, taking advantage of the opportunity that has come your way, Korone said sarcastically and discontentedly. This does not mean at all that you will act the same way in the future. The statistics of your behavior speaks volumes about this. Having said this, the android showed slight irritation on her face and, still concentrated, sent another cake into her mouth. But how exactly can I be useful? Alice looked at Korone and back, puzzled. I don't really know anything myself. Miss Winters hasn't even started working with me yet, really. She see, well, at least by telling me about your activities and at the same time allowing me to occasionally scan the work of your brain, so that it would be possible to track the work of your abilities. But it's forbidden to read other people only without permission. I raise my finger admonishingly.
Besides, I didn't talk about deep scanning, that would really be illegal. But any, even accidentally read by you, superficial thoughts and emotions can already allow you to understand the principles by which such abilities work. The telepath's face reflected intense thought and reflection.
She was clearly weighing the pros and cons.
On the one hand, she had already broken the law when she stole her food. But petty thefts at the market out of need were one thing, and the illegal use of telepathy under the supervision of an ambassador of an alien empire was another.
You said something about brain scanning.
A completely safe procedure, I assure you. A couple of small sensors on the head will be quite enough. And nothing else. There was still doubt in his voice. Alice. I pretend to sigh tiredly, carefully monitoring the girl's reactions. Let's agree on this. I understand that this whole situation was quite unexpected for you, and you clearly came unprepared for a serious conversation. I smiled broadly. So first come to your senses, rest, get some sleep, eat normally, walk around the station if you want, and then start thinking and making decisions. After all, you can leave the territory of the Empire at any time and return to the jurisdiction of Earth. I take out from the table a reliable copy of the pass card created by nanites, which also functions as a wallet here, and hand it to the girl.
At the same time, there will be additional insurance.
A beacon. There's some money here. Enough to do everything I listed. But not so much that you'd refuse to accept it. But Alice hesitantly took her card out of her pocket.
I already have a key. They just wrote down access to the embassy sector and to my new cabin on it.
Then just use this one as a wallet. I shrug. Okay. After a short silence, the girl finally nodded, accepting the extended piece of plastic. Well, now I suppose we can round off the conversation. We can't burden her with complex thoughts and decisions from the very beginning. After all, despite the faster maturation of the street kid, in front of me was just a teenager. Then, if you have no more urgent matters to resolve, I would like to settle a few of my boring embassy matters. Oh, did I distract you after all? Well, I told you. As there is a child quickly switching between different emotions and behavior patterns, sometimes it is useful to do this, for which I thank you, but still the work will not finish itself. I understand. Thank you again for your help. The cheerful telepath jumped out of the cabin, running in the direction of her door, leaving me sitting and thinking about the conversation that had just taken place. Had I gone too far with the image of a kind uncle, which would have been somewhat unusual for an ambassador? Although if you remember, Delenn also treated Alice quite warmly, of course until she tried to read her. Well, after a while it will be seen how promising the girl is for research. Well, our new charge is settled for a while. Now, I turned to my assistant as soon as the door closed behind Alice. I will have an assignment for you. Start buying everything necessary to provide a living corner on our planet with conditions for a person. Including vegetation for the park area, it's irrational. If you're planning to transport a human telepath to a territory under your control, why bother with all this? A regular camera would be enough to study the phenomenon.
How kind you are.
I smile. Nevertheless, it is necessary. Under duress, the intelligent work much worse than voluntarily and with full confidence in the freedom of their choice. The girl's face clearly showed disapproval and incomprehension as to why I was stubbornly finding difficulties for myself out of nowhere, but surprisingly, Korone remained silent, only slightly twitching her ear. Any wishes regarding plants? Focus on the Earth's flora. If you wish, you can add small animals or birds, but nothing predatory or dangerous. Accept it, although I continue to insist that this is a waste of resources. I will take your opinion into consideration. Korone nodded, shook off the crumbs, and taking the basket with the remaining cakes, retired to her room. Well, one can only hope that the consequences of her shopping will not be an international scandal due to insulting the local population.
Interlude.
Do you understand how the management will react to such a report? We launch a prototype of the device in front of you, and you saw the test results. Yes, but that doesn't mean anything. The grey and dark-skinned man irritably threw the folder with the report of his subordinates away from himself, leaning back in his chair. It turned out to be some kind of incredible wildness, a gift from a highly developed civilization, which fell on earthlings like snow on the head in July, practically turned modern science upside down. Professor Mirde, who devoted more than 20 years of his life to development and improvements
in the field of shipbuilding, was ready to tear his hair out.
At first, everything looked as usual. An order came from above to look into yet another alien technology that had come to Earth, to understand whether it had any bookmarks and whether these developments could be used in production.
Everything, as always. Having habitually given the staff of engineers and programmers the task of studying the documentation, John Murd could not even imagine what a fuss would arise because of the new arrival.
Nevertheless, we checked,
the subordinate said. The instructions and drawings presented on the infocrystal are easily executed at our production base. Moreover, there are separate notes there on how to implement new technology with minimal labor costs when upgrading existing ships. And you also forgot to mention that the crystal contains theoretical information on the principles of operation and the creation of artificial gravity.
Well, yes, the engineer nodded. And at the same time, logic templates for control programs. Moreover, the reference is exhaustive and accessible. Concepts that are absent in our science are explained through understandable terms and known laws. At least those that this device does not contradict. What about reverse engineering?
Murd drummed his fingers on the tabletop.
Can your guys work with that? I can't say anything yet. On the one hand, it would seem that the whole theory is offered to us on a silver platter, chewed up so that we can only swallow it. But on the other hand...
Personally, I don't really have a clear idea yet of how to move from creating a region with directed gravity to something else. This is looking more and more like some kind of mockery. We'll figure it out. It's just a matter of time.
If we have it, the man sighed. The presidential elections are coming up, and something around us is starting to smell of xenophobia.
I hope they don't shut us down at this rate, for the sake of, quote, preserving the purity of the human race and culture.
The subordinate remained silent, only shrugging his shoulders. Okay, go on with your work. Check everything again.
And tell the IT guys not to get too carried away with using the proposed logic template.
Who knows what will come out of such code? We'll do it. Then I'm going? Go ahead. And I'll try to turn your report into something digestible, so that the bosses don't screw us too much. The engineer left, and John Murd thoughtfully ran his fingertips over the tabletop, sorting through the objects lying around. There was definitely something fishy about this gift. It was all too simple and clear to be real. So there was some kind of dirty trick hidden somewhere. There had to be. As his father used to say, if you see a setup, look for another one.
But if there are no setups, look for 10 at once. And no, this is not paranoia. Almost.
Hello, Alice. Talia Winter smiled warmly at the girl, letting her into her cabin.
Hello, Miss Winters.
The young telepath took a deep breath before stepping over the threshold. I hope you've settled in well with Lord Baal. Don't you regret your decision?
No, the girl shook her head. In the past tense, of course.
I only spoke to him once, but everything is really fine. At least I don't have to steal anymore so as not to die of hunger. And the cabin is simply gorgeous, even a little uncomfortable. After all, where am I? And where is the diplomatic sector? And no, I will not go to the course. Okay, Talia sighed. Then let's get started? Not even in the core, much less in the core. You need to be taught at least basic control of your powers.
I'm ready.
Well, listen. Talia closed her eyes for a moment, remembering what it was like in her own childhood. The first lessons, the failures and successes, the realization of her own difference from other people.
When we found you, you felt very bad. You heard many loud voices, speaking at the same time.
And as if right in your ears, right? Alice nodded, shuddering slightly at the memory. It's called mental shock when there are too many minds around. Even an experienced and trained telepath can have a hard time containing their thoughts. What can we say about those who are just realizing their gift?
But now, everything seems to be fine,
the girl said in surprise. You taught me how to build that wall.
True, the telepath nodded. But I rather led you by the hand than really taught you anything.
You must learn the main and fundamental things. To put up or remove this barrier at your own will. To make a door or a window in it. Anything that your imagination and willpower can come up with. Is it that simple? Of course not. But learning something complicated and truly fascinating is pointless. Without these basics, you won't understand anything, and you can harm yourself. In any case, Talia shook her head. There is no talk of that. Firstly, I won't be able to teach you everything, and secondly, you still refuse to join the Corps. I understand. Well then let's continue. The telepath moved closer to the girl, stretching her hands to her temples.
Now you will have to completely remove the built wall and start building it again, slowly and consistently. Don't worry, I will close you off from other people's thoughts around you for a while. Shall we begin?
Alice nodded with some tension, but then closed her eyes and taking a few deep breaths, relaxed in the chair. The universe is vast and immeasurable. The paths of its development are unknowable. And what can we say about the fantasy and unpredictability of its diversity? What am I talking about? Oh yeah. Once again I am convinced that the philosophers were right and thought is material. Having turned my attention to one of the research modules, which was still continuing to plow the area of the galaxy that I had appropriated, having discovered another promising world, I realized its surprise that the younger ones had already calculated a complete genetic map for the race of Nico girls. And I hadn't even begun to seriously consider this fleeting momentary desire of mine.
Another of your absurd ideas, Lord Baal?
Korone, it seems, was not at all embarrassed to actually keep an eye on me, tracking all the thought processes of myself. That is, simply eavesdropping on my thoughts. You won't understand this, but cats, cat people, cat women. Here even I, a human, began to think about the inadequacy of my behavior. In any case, it would look extremely strange if there were no population, or at least service personnel, at the outpost of a highly developed intergalactic empire. You won't... Exactly. Alice will be rather bored there, and I won't be able to be around all the time. A small population of a species related to yours would be handy. The very fact of such efforts for the sake of one single telepath. In the girl's thought speech one could read not even condemnation, but some kind of indignation at such an absurd from her point of view party policy. Forces us to assume that. You have a malfunction.
I recommend checking the primary code for random errors.
No, I'm fine. Besides, I can make you several sisters. I thoughtfully answered my assistant, but I haven't decided on their appearance yet. I fundamentally differ from any other replicator only in the functionality of the platform and the structure of the logical matrix. You should understand this better than any creature in this galaxy. After all, it was you who created me, Korone said reproachfully. Yes. Do you agree with me? Liladan's ears turned to the sides in surprise. Yes, I haven't decided on the structure of the logical matrix either. What do you think is better? Another tsundere or a kudere? You are impossible. I exist, so I'm definitely possible. I chuckle in response. So what's your opinion? Kudere. The Neko finally answered the question. Agreed. By the way, have you checked the order of vegetation for the planet? You can find out for yourself. I absolutely do not understand your deliberate demarcation of memory areas. We are part of the collective in any case. You didn't answer. The order for vegetation and small animals has been placed on the official portal of the Goa'uld Transport Company. Neka switched a business-like tone, based on the statistics of similar orders with a probability of 70.1432%. In 6 hours, 12 minutes, 42 seconds, they will contact me to agree on the delivery time and payment methods. What company? Excuse me? Goa'uld Yutani, Nika repeated calmly. Based on reviews, it's a very reliable carrier, specializing in a wide range of transportation. Were there any alternatives? This is the most suitable company taking into account the specifics of the order. I hope they didn't bring me extra animals with such a name completely free of charge. Yeah. And then the thoughts about cat girls already gave results. I was missing something else, Ilan. Okay, let it be her. But you're a bore. You created me like this, now reap the benefits. So much for external logic. Mentally muttering something like, listen to the android and do the opposite. I leave the probe to continue exploring the system and still give the genetic lab the command to start growing several cat people. Cat people. I need to come up with a name for them.
otherwise it doesn't sound very good. Perhaps Elise will soon have living servants and interlocutors, especially since the question of loyalty in the case of artificially grown creatures was not an issue at all.
Well, now perhaps we can pay attention to another issue.
The research probe sent into degenerate space stubbornly followed this space, catching the slightest glimmer of signals or traces of cosmic bodies.
I did not even mention traces of intelligent life.
I suppose that if someone does live there, which is extremely unlikely, then, given the known physical conditions of this place, it will be possible to stumble upon it only by chance, or by knowing 101% exactly where to look.
Space turned out to be an extremely curious place.
The parameters known from publicly available sources and databases that I had obtained accounted for 35.4561% of the spectrum of radiation, fields and properties that the replicator sensors
had captured. With a probability of 74.0652%,
the mathematical model compiled from this data confirmed that the degenerate space was once practically identical to ordinary space. Large cosmic bodies, high energy formations like stars, but for some reason,
unknown to me,
all of these disappear, almost completely transformed into a state of various types of radiation, which created the notorious currents of hyperspace. One could assume that this really was an ordinary space, a parallel dimension.
Only now, aged, practically dead.
A sad confirmation of the theory of the expansion of the universe, if so. I wonder, could this not be explained by an incredible temporal shift within the local universe alone, so to speak, the distant future of this world? Even I was moved by the picture that presented itself. But the computing network of replicators gave the probability of such an outcome as an insignificant 0.0123%. The amount of energy required to open the transition funnel was too small compared to that required for such a large-scale temporal movement. So, most likely, this is a parallel dimension. Probably, it's interesting how something alive can exist in such conditions. Everything is clear with the ships. They already have a closed ecosystem, and the hull sufficiently shields from all this ugliness. But all the rumors about some inhabitants of this place encountered during the flight by explorers of deep space are not out of nowhere. The only man-made objects detected by my modules at the limit of sensor sensitivity in the past time were homing beacons of various races scattered, I believe, throughout the explored zone of space. Each beacon was a small unmanned station, equipped with a reactor, engines for position correction, and a fairly powerful emitter, emitting a directed beam of tachyons, leading to similar nearby beacons. Such beacons, as I knew, were placed near each transition zone, and in cases where the distance between the explored systems was extremely large, also somewhere along the way. In fact, for the locals, this was the only way to navigate in hyperspace, and if they lost it, and there were many cases of ships lost in hyperspace on the local internet, they might never show up in the explored area of the galaxy. It turns out that the distances and coordinates of degenerate space and ordinary space really had nothing in common, since the probes enter hyperspace at a great distance from the part of the galaxy explored by the local races. An additional benefit of the research was the result of one of the experiments when the research probe opened a hyperspace window inside the degenerate space using Asgard technology. Such an experiment had been calculated long ago, but a mathematical model is a mathematical model and natural tests are a completely different matter. The results fully confirm the conclusions made by the replicators based on the known data, despite the external differences between the spaces of ordinary and degenerate space, as well as some discrepancies in the values of physical constants. The hyperjump went, as they say, like a textbook. The only difference was the color of the open hyperspace window in ordinary space. It was blue, but here for some reason it became dark purple. Although this did not affect the result in any way, so it could be completely ignored. Interlude. Following a sudden impulse, Lieutenant Ivanova walked leisurely towards one of the establishments of the entertainment and trade section of Babylon, taking a walk before going to bed and at the same time working off, making a tour of part of the station's trade zone. A bad habit, if you think about it, but such walks at the end of her shifts helped her calm her thoughts and switch herself from a work mood to rest. And today, especially, in one of the restaurant clubs known among the creative population of the station, a theatrical production dedicated to ancient Earth history was planned. What a bedtime story. And for some unknown reason, Susan took the fate of the young telepath quite close to heart. Without realizing whether it was just petty revenge for the experiences of her childhood, a way to sting the core she hated so much, or simply a suddenly awakened maternal instinct. In any case, the solution to the problem that came to her mind seemed quite worthy, satisfying all the goals and objectives. Only Lord Baal. Ivanova sighed, letting the people and aliens exiting the elevator and heading to the nearest drinking establishments pass. He was absolutely independent and uncontrollable, at least that's how it seemed to her. This is a plus, since with him by her side, the girl was probably out of reach, even for the entire Psi Corps. But there was also a drawback, exactly the same. If something happened, Ivanova would not be able to change anything from her point of view. Although he was clearly friendly, almost pacifist.
Lieutenant Ivanova!
Alice? The woman smiled, slightly surprised, looking at a girl walking towards her. Communication with Lord Baal clearly benefited the young telepath. The girl began to eat better, dressed in something neater and better quality than the shabby rags she was found in. And the overall impression she gave was happier, or something. I wanted to thank you again for your help. You made the choice yourself. The woman shook her head with the same smile. But you gave me a chance and showed me the possibility of choice.
And this is best of all, I'm used to relying only on myself, and this is not easy.
And your acquaintance with Lord Baal. Not such an acquaintance, muttered Ivanova, continuing more loudly. It wasn't difficult, especially since other options didn't appeal to either you or me. That's for sure, Narns. Alice grimaced. Are you okay? Yes, quite. Lord Baal, of course, is busy with some of his own affairs now, but at least he is always open to questions and provided me with everything I needed. I'm glad you're happy with everything, Alice. What a meeting, Madame Lieutenant. With his unchanging smile, the Goa'uld ambassador in question appeared from the elevator. Alice, a polite short bow. Is everything all right? Yes, everything is fine, Lord Baal, the girl nodded. I just thank Lieutenant Ivanova again for helping me solve my problems. And thank you, Lord Baal, Ivanova added, for agreeing to shelter the girl. We've already discussed this. The man shrugged. It took me practically no effort. Baal glanced along the corridor and at Ivanova. Lieutenant, would you like to keep Elisa and me company? Company? The woman raised an eyebrow in surprise, and Alice looked at the ambassador with the same surprise. In one of the establishments, Summer Castle, it seems that today there will be a theatrical performance dedicated to one of the episodes of your ancient history. I think it will be quite interesting to see. That's exactly where I was heading, to be honest. Ivanova shrugged, puzzled. Oh, what a wonderful coincidence. And you? The man turned to the telepath. Let's go, Ivanova smiled. In the castle, they really do sometimes put on historical performances like this. For young people, and just for the curious. To show, so to speak, human history of ancient times. At the same time, it will be interesting to compare it with the truth. Baal chuckled. Sorry? Oh, the man waved his hand. Alice thought for a moment. But then curiosity won out, and she nodded in agreement. And Ivanova frowned in confusion, digesting the last reservation of the Goa'uld ambassador, who, as it suddenly turns out, knows how everything was for real on Earth, in such a distant past as far as she knew. The production, in the Summer Castle, was dedicated to ancient Jewish history and the legends associated with that period. Everything is completely different from how it was. Baal grumbled under his breath. Only a dozen or 2 centuries, and everything has already been distorted so much. Well, I told Yehuda to write down the instructions. Even though it was a toy, but it was a collector's item. And the Svan only scratched his name right on the activation rune. Having heard part of the phrase, Ivanova froze in her chair like a statue, catching every word. At that very moment, the creation of a mythical golem was being shown on stage. Oh, what are you talking about, Lord Baal? Susan whispered, leaning towards the ambassador. Baal answered a little absent-mindedly, continuing to watch the performance with a displeased and puzzled look. Lord Baal? No, nothing like that, Madame Lieutenant. Shaking himself, the man looked around with annoyance and muttered something in a strange rumbling language which, apparently, as the officers on the Babylon believed, was his native language. The woman could only continue watching the show and try to understand what this alien was talking about. What collectible? How could he say something to Judah ben Bezalel who lived, damn it, centuries ago? Surely it couldn't be... No. Impossible. A golem, a collectible, a toy, and what a name. Ivanova feverishly recalled everything she knew from childhood about the history of her people. The protector of the Jewish people, according to legend, created from clay in the image and likeness of God's creation of Adam. How there was something there, a tablet with God's name, placed in his mouth. Susan seemed to be petrified, trying to digest the news that turned all her notions of faith and culture upside down. I see dead people, little boy. Interlude. Ivanova looks tensely at the scanner readings, displaying the state of the planet beneath the station. Over the past few hours, a whole series of tremors had been detected, rolling across the surface, and considering that the further they went, the stronger and more frequent they became. In short, the lieutenant, like all the other inhabitants of the Paranandran station, had certain reasons for concern. Are the seismic tremors continuing? Sinclair approached his deputy. It's quiet on the surface now, Ivanova said doubtfully. But in the depths we can still detect vibrations, and they don't subside. We can do something if... What if something goes wrong? I'm not sure. I wouldn't worry if it were in a neighboring system, but Babylon is orbiting this planet. We need to check, the commander nodded. I was just about to do this. Lieutenant? One of the controllers spoke up. Shuttle 1 is reporting that they are ready to take off. Good. Shuttle 1, Ivanova approached the main console. You can begin research, but be careful. Through the observation window, Sinclair and Ivanova watched as one of the Babylon shuttles smoothly emerged from the service dock and slowly headed toward the planet below. Since Ivanova had earlier given instructions to remain in constant contact, the measured commentary of the shuttle pilot and the echoing voice of a space geologist read out to his colleagues the readings of some sensors, recording all the data as transport approached the surface. What the hell was that? Engines are off, controls are not working. As soon as the shuttle descended into the planet's atmosphere and began its descent toward the surface, a white purple beam struck from somewhere in the depths of one of the crevices, throwing the ship aside.
Ivanova, what was that?
I have no idea, but it even affected the station. The lieutenant looked in shock at the terminal screens that went dark for a few seconds and the lights that flickered. Central, calling Shuttle 1. Shuttle, can you hear us? We hear. Babylon 5. What was that? All our terminals went out. What kind of beam was that? Everything went out for us too. There was some kind of energy wave that threw us aside. It came from the depths of the planet, just from a crevice. How is your condition? Sinclair joined the conversation. The control systems are burned out, Commander. We won't be able to get back to the station ourselves. If it's not too much trouble, could you send someone to give us a ride home? Despite his attempts to joke, it was clear from the pilot's voice that the situation was dire. If they couldn't restore control of the propulsion system, after a very short time the shuttle would simply fall to the planet. The station's control center understood this too.
We are sending 2 Star Furies to pick you up. Don't move anywhere and be ready.
Sinclair shook his head disapprovingly at the lieutenant's riposte, but couldn't help but chuckle. Well, laughing is laughing, but the situation would become more complicated and serious if there was someone on the planet. Damn it. Jeffrey felt somehow completely uncomfortable at the thought that there was someone on Epsilon 3, which, according to all catalogs, was considered not just uninhabited, but completely unsuitable for life. Or something... Another question, what would be worse? Yes. It seems that the operator of the great machine has gotten really bad. Based on the data received by the device itself, and intercepted by the younger ones, of course, from the sensors on the alien's body, his health was deteriorating quickly and severely. Strictly speaking, if he were a human, the operator should have kicked the bucket a couple of years ago. With a heart that stops beating repeatedly and organs that are partially failing, you can't live for very long. All that supported him and prevented the planet from wiping Babylon off the face of the system was a fairly advanced and effective life support system built into the machine by its creators.
Only now even this system could not cope. A powerful, narrow beam of energy, identified by the younger ones as a specific method of transmitting information over long distances, had gone from the great machine somewhere into space.
The data packet transmitted at a certain frequency contained a report on the state of the device's equipment, an alarm signal about the high probability of failure of the control element, and a request for a replacement operator. Interesting. The beam that left Epsilon 3 was directed somewhere to a distant corner of the galaxy, located not far from my borders.
Of course, even with the capabilities of the replicators in the past time, I did not have time to thoroughly study all the systems belonging to me, but something told me that the recipient of this signal is no longer in the galaxy. Even if they, like all the local ancients, did not disappear into the unknown, for the last at least 3,000 years, the creators have never visited their creation, which means that they either died out or they do not care. But something needs to be done about the relatives of the dying operator. If everything goes as it should, the machine will still go to Dral, but extra competitors were completely unnecessary. And the question is, where exactly will these comrades fly to assert their rights from my territories where their system was discovered, to crawl almost a year with local technologies? However, it does not matter. It would be more rational to assimilate this civilization immediately after it was discovered. They must have the coordinates of their planets, and it would be even more rational to block the device from sending a signal. You are incorrigible. It's not interesting, I smiled to myself. Besides, I still don't have enough data on the operating principles of some of the planetary complexes systems. And from the point of view of the logic you adore so much, the risk of losing a unique source of information and an object of research is not worth rushing to study this device. The probability of such an outcome is 17.2543%. That's enough to stop me from doing that. Besides, you know my attitude towards such abrupt changes in events. Your precognition of the future is absurd. You already said so. I wave my assistant off. The fact that the great machine's creators and owners would come for it was considered an extremely unlikely event, and I would be able to study its structure without abruptly intercepting the control circuits. The current situation would allow me to track the processes of adjusting the machine to a new operator with a different physiology, and perhaps obtain a little more information about the principles of its control interface. Besides, it will be interesting to watch the actions of human ships in a combat situation. I am more than sure that Sinclair has already sent a report to Earth on what is happening on the planet below, and the Space Fleet Command will not miss the opportunity to flex its muscles, especially if my neighbors arrive here. And it is not so important who controls the device there, as long as he does not get in the way. And the Minbari operator who replaced the old operator was not a particular fan of actively interfering in what is happening anyway. It is all about profit, no matter what Korone says. Well, while the station's command is solving its pressing problems on the topic of how to prevent the Babylon from turning into a pile of garbage, we can distract ourselves for a while with our own... No, of course, not problems, just business. Without the requirement to create something particularly specific, like telepaths. The technology of cloning the Asgards was sufficiently perfect and effective to create in the shortest possible time, if not an entire biological species, then at least a sufficient number of its representatives. Well, and then, logically, they will reproduce themselves. Besides, I was going to work on the next as a biological species anyway. Why not now, when I have some free time? Cracking my fingers, figuratively speaking, I set about refining the project calculated by the juniors in order to bring it to the parameters I needed. First of all, taking exclusively the genetic code of Earth inhabitants as a basis was a mistaken decision, although the most cost-effective, in terms of the ratio of the volume of computational operations to obtaining the desired result. It cannot be ruled out that tissue samples of one of my creations will end up at the disposal of local species, and if I take only a human and a cat as a basis, even earthly geneticists will immediately determine this. But if the failure of my legend in front of Earthlings, by and large, cannot threaten my safety, then find out about the staging of the Vorlons and the Shadows.
As I see it, it is better not to let it come to this than to live in anticipation of possible surprises. Therefore, let's do it differently and take on a fascinating construction set. Humans, Centaurians, Minbari, Dilgars, and so on down the list, so that in the resulting bundle of chromosomes, no one in their right mind would be able to discern the features of any specific inhabitants of this galaxy. Of course, even just creating a viable hybrid of so many species with different, sometimes radically different physiology, is a task close to impossible. But I am one of those who can afford the computing power needed to solve it. Why? But this is only the beginning. It is absolutely necessary to provide for the integration of the species into the replicator network. Genetic modification of the nervous system, increased brain performance, and of course, comprehensive augmentation. After all, the replicator network has already reached a level of information saturation in the galaxy that no organic brain, even a heavily modified one, can withstand. Therefore, we make computing centers integrated into the nervous system, serving as both a point of contact and a filter between the replicator collective and the consciousness of an organic, filtering out only the conversational part.
All the same, the Nex will not be able to participate in the current computing processes that are constantly running in the background in the network.
And that's not why I make them. So we develop the brain structure so that there is room for these implants from the start, without requiring outside intervention in the body. Well, the same with the rest of the body. Comfort implants that increase the survivability of a unit are by no means a useless thing, and only at the very end does it make sense to work on the appearance. So, the males will be typical cat people of a particularly brutal version, all variations of representatives of the cat family as a base. Short fur of all possible colors in nature, increased reaction, strength, endurance, enhanced senses. What else? The facial and body features are closer to human, no animal muzzles, although the ears and tail will definitely be present as well as claws on the fingers. But with the female part of the species, it will be a little more interesting. If it is necky, then they should be beautiful. Graceful and flexible, no fur except on the ears and tail. Cat eyes. All possible hair colors according to common sense, increased endurance and agility. There are claws on the fingers, but more neat than those of males. Both sexes are purring, and sometimes instincts of distant ancestors break through in a more pronounced reaction to mint and valerian. Yes, definitely. I have a premonition in advance of what comments and colorful glances Korone will give me when he sees this project, but this is necky. It is illogical to waste resources on different nomenclature with the same functionality. Unification is the key to progress and development. Korone said, hunched over a bag of cookies, having briefly peeked at my actions. Making a race of hermaphrodites or providing for same-sex reproduction is even more illogical. Launching a series of two genders will require the development of two sets of upper and lower clothing, behavioral paradigms, social and political mechanisms. The android put another cookie in her mouth. And also, fur on the back is not aesthetically pleasing. If the locals meet representatives of the new species, there will be a lack of understanding and psychological rejection of such a social structure and biological characteristics. I counter my assistant's argument. Despite her sarcasm and love of teasing, Korone did serve as my logical self in a way, making my plans much simpler and more practical. Therefore, I was simply obliged to listen to her opinion, especially when it was expressed so persistently. The probability of such an outcome of the meeting is 68.318%. However, Liladen looked sadly into the empty bag. Even for the presentation to the native inhabitants of the galaxy, there is no need to actually create representatives of both sexes. Your suggestion? Since your penchant for immoral behavior in conjunction with Ambassador Molari is already known among the station personnel, Korone made a theatrical pause, literally filled with sarcasm and disapproval. It will be quite logical for an outside observer that, when selecting service personnel for a residence, you are concerned with purely selfish goals, and took with you only females of the species. Moreover, then the female version can be immediately introduced into development and run through test trials. Korone took a chocolate bar out of her bag and crunched the wrapper. This will allow us to identify unforeseen errors and only then begin creating the male half of the species, making corrective changes to the female one. And there will be more time for calibration. Plus,
A test batch of one gender will in any case be cheaper than an unsuccessful development of non-standardized units. Considering the conversation over, the girl stood up from the sofa with an extremely concentrated look and throwing the cookie bag into the recycling bin along the way, headed to a room where, as far as I knew, she kept a supply of sweets and drinks for them, for a rainy day. Well, having run through the required parameters once more, I nevertheless made the changes that the assistant suggested. The savings in energy and material costs were indeed quite significant. So having checked whether I forgot something important, I give the command to the juniors to recalculate and compile a genetic map of the species. Although it is small, it will still take time. Symbol cloning and the creation of a living organism by phenotype are slightly different levels of labor costs. Interlude. All previous studies and scans have not found any signs of life or any automatic systems on Epsilon 3. The archaeologist shook his head, answering the station commander's question. Neither on the surface nor in the depths of the planet. Dr. Tasaki, but the missiles couldn't have come out of nowhere. Well, I don't deny it, and that's exactly why we need to continue our research. Commander, we need to go back down and find out everything. Will you allow me? Receiving an assenting nod from Sinclair, the man stood up and walked around the commander's desk, leaning toward the terminal. A few seconds later, a photo of the planet's surface appeared on one of the overview monitors on the wall, clearly taken from the Explorer's shuttle. This is an enlarged and computer-processed image of Sector 14. We managed to make it just before the attack on the shuttle. I don't see anything special, Ivanova said, puzzled, coming closer. There's obviously a crevice here, but no signs of life. Wait now. The archaeologist pressed several buttons, enlarging the image on the screen and framing the white stroke. This is one of the first missiles that were fired at us, and it clearly flew out from under the surface of the planet. Is this crevice natural or not? Sinclair asked thoughtfully. It's hard to say. It's equally likely that it's a man-made formation or that it appeared after one of the earthquakes. But then, you think this is an ancient defense system? Of something that suddenly turned on? Ivanova stared at the screen tensely. That's the most obvious conclusion. The archaeologist shrugged. And how deep is this crevice? That's an interesting question, Commander. According to our data, the missile was fired from a depth of 5 miles. So there's definitely something there. Something very valuable, if they created such a defense for it. Thank you, Doctor. This is worth thinking about. The archaeologist bowed briefly and quickly left the office. What do you think about all this, Lieutenant? There could be anything there, Ivanova began. Any possible weapon, as well as something we have no idea about. So, the woman shrugged. Until we know more, I'll consider it a threat to Babylon 5. I agree, Sinclair sighed. But it could also be a first contact situation, which complicates the whole situation considerably. We need to get down there and check it out. A contented Londo Mollari, smiling from ear to ear, walked along the station corridor, whistling under his breath some catchy melody that had stuck to him in one of the taverns in the entertainment part of the station. Oh, stopping at the elevator, the ambassador stretched his entire body and sighed blissfully. Life is beautiful and amazing, no matter what Mr. Garibaldi thinks about it, trying to poison my life with his sour face. Help me. The startled Centaurian almost dropped the glass that was habitually lying in his hand in the middle of the corridor. Right in front of the ambassador stood the translucent figure of an unknown alien. The speaker was clearly in a very bad way. Londo could understand that even without being a doctor. But where did he come from anyway? As if he appeared out of thin air. Help me, I beg you. The figure, with a pained expression on his face, pressed his hands to his chest, obviously struggling to stay upright. Looking around nervously, the Centauri swallowed, as always when he needed guards or medics, none of whom were around. Only something happens, as the station dies. Mysticism and nothing more. The unfamiliar alien swayed, clearly about to fall where he stood, and Londo, without thinking, jerked forward to catch, to help, and flew through the figure, which instantly dissolved into thin air, as if he had never been there. Damn it. Either it's time for me to stop drinking, or some kind of nonsense is happening on Babylon again. Morgoth, protect me. And it was such a nice day. With difficulty suppressing the trembling in his hand, Londo Molari looked around once more and, not finding anything new, with a slightly jerky gait, headed further towards the elevator. The planet beneath the station was becoming increasingly feverish, causing a natural uproar among the Babylon staff. The flight schedule even included an unscheduled shuttle departure heading down to the planet. And damn it, he has feeling
Sinclair and Ivanova were going to fly on it.
And I thought it was only an old TV series like Star Trek that the captain, first officer, and head of security were always sent on dangerous or questionable missions, sometimes taking the chief engineer along with them. Yeah, I had a slightly better opinion of the commander's sanity. Lord Baal, may I come in? Alice was shifting from foot to foot in the corridor in front of the door. Yes, Alice, come in, opening the door. Did something happen?
No.
The girl shook her head.
Just that, if you have time, I would like to know a little more about what exactly my duties will be in response to being granted asylum on the territory of the Goa'uld Empire.
We were talking about brain scanning. Yes, I nod, smiling and inviting the girl to sit in the chair. And I also said that there's nothing special about it, just a few sensors of approximately this size, I show with my fingers, attached to the head and throw the... Well, and you will have to do a scan, so that the sensors can detect how exactly your brain does it. But I still can't rest because it's forbidden. After all, it's precisely because of this that the Psi Corps tracks down telepaths to avoid unauthorized scanning. As I already said, we are not talking about deep scanning, radiant thoughts, which is really prohibited by the laws of the Earth Commonwealth. Superficial reading is another matter. With such influence, a telepath, as far as I know, can see only momentary thoughts, and very bright ones at that. Emotions, attitude towards the interlocutor, whether he is telling the truth in words, nothing really important and secret.
Besides, I lean back on the sofa. We are talking about the laws of the Earth. In our empire, such a band does not exist, and you can always hire a special person to work with you in tandem. Oh, Alice suddenly jumped to her feet, looking in surprise somewhere behind me. Lord Baal, who is this?
The girl stared into the corner of the room, although all the sensors and surveillance equipment told me that there was no one else in the room except us. What? How can I help you? Lord Baal? Do you see? But I didn't see it. There was no one else in any of the radiation spectra in the room. No mass, no field interactions, nothing. It wasn't someone from the shadows, not a Vorlon. A hallucination? Perhaps. Even telepaths aren't immune to that.
The great machine below shuddered once again, shaking the planet, although not so much as to catch the station in its orbit.
And at the same moment, the young ones inside the structure tracked activity in one of the units of the device responsible for communication. Curious. No, Alice, I say slowly, turning back to the girl. I don't see anyone here except us. But how? There he is, asking for help. He's clearly not feeling well. Oh. Alice stopped short. And now he's gone. Lord Baal. What? What was that? Is there something wrong with me? No, I think, I thoughtfully stroked my beard, that everything is completely fine with you. Tell me, and what did the creature you saw look like? Well, an alien, the girl began, obviously very old. Although this is only an assumption. A wrinkled, hairless face, dressed in simple, unremarkable clothes. And he was ill. He asked for help, and then he disappeared. The telepath's gaze was filled with a cocktail of compassion, pity, fear, and uncertainty. I see, I stroked my beard. Do you mind if I take a look myself? Look? The girl blinked in confusion. Oh, it's okay. I get up from the couch and come closer. Even though we think in different planes, I can temporarily connect our minds directly and look at your memories. I promise that I'll limit myself to exactly the right moment. Well, if you say so. What should I do? It's okay, just sit still. There might be some discomfort at first, but it will pass quickly. Ready? Alice nodded slightly twitchingly, after which I raised my hand and without a pause inserted it into her forehead. Connecting to the human higher nervous system took less than a second,
In this regard, telepaths were no different from others.
Having made sure that the girl's condition was normal, I allocated some computing resources, creating for us a personal area of dialogue, free from the informational presence of other replicators.
Oh, where are we? The telepath opened her eyes and looked around in shock at the endless plain made up of basic replicator blocks, the neutral haze of the sky above, and the blue-black thunderclouds on the quote-unquote horizon. There was nothing else around.
What is it, Lord Baal? Alice asked in surprise, continuing to look around.
This is my mind.
Or rather, the part of it that you can comprehend, I shrug. In fact, we are still in the embassy cabin, and all this, I wave my hand around the space, is nothing more than the result of the work of consciousness. It's unbelievable. But everything here is so real. The girl squatted down and touched the floor under her feet. And at the same time I understand that this is unreal. What the mind believes in, I smile, is reality for the mind. And now, if you don't mind, let's still look at what you saw. Alice, rising to her feet again, nodded, looking at me expectantly. The next moment, the space around smoothly changed, so that in a second it was the embassy cabin of the Babylon, in which our doubles sat motionless.
Oh, the telepath said again, where the image moved, and we heard the conversation that had just taken place. This is incredible.
Here I stopped the playback, coming closer to the translucent figure that appeared in the corner of the room. Did you see him? Yes, it's him. Let's listen to what he wanted to say. Help me, please. The thing came to life again, and the alien spoke, barely able to stay on his feet and clearly experiencing severe pain. Curiously, as a hide, it really was the operator of the great machine who was in a special device all this time connecting his body to the control interface. So this, albeit indirectly for now, was confirmed by the fact that I did not see him in the cabin, that he communicated with the inhabitants of the station using telepathic projections. And given the peculiarities of the replicators, the great machine simply did not see my mind.
Alice, being a young and practically untrained telepath, should have practically glowed in the mental plane, easily caught against the background of the general mass of inhabitants of Babylon. Lord Baal.
Alice tore herself away from looking at the operator of the great machine, and who is this? And why did I see him and you didn't? I suppose it's because he communicated with you via a telepathic projection created in your brain. So I just didn't perceive his message. And as for who it is, I sigh, walking around the translucent apparator. This is the reason why the planet beneath us is falling apart, reaching the Babylon with tremors, and the station's command feels so uncomfortable. But Alice looked at me in confusion. This is, so to speak, the control element, the operator of the great machine. A device built by one ancient race down there. I point my finger at the floor. And it is apparently already very old, which is the main problem. Without an operator, the great machine goes haywire.
Can you help him, Lord Baal? The girl leaned forward with a mixture of hope and fear. After all, we here above the planet, and he, besides, asked for help.
Alas, no, I throw up my hands. The problem with the great machine is not a technical malfunction, it is that the operator dies. And what? We can't do anything? Why not? As soon as someone takes his place, everything will be the same. Maybe you... No, Alice. I shake my head with a smile. Even leaving out all the details if the operator is appointed by the Empire, I grin. I'm afraid your civilizations will perceive this too, acutely. But what should we do then? Let's wait. As far as I know, Commander Sinclair and Lieutenant Ivanova are aware of the situation. And they, being extremely responsible officers, are doing and will do everything necessary to resolve the crisis. The girl fell silent, frowning tensely. Well, I get her attention. I saw what I wanted. Are we going back to the real world? Huh? Yes, I think so. And what do I need to do? Alice finished the sentence, already sitting in her previous place in my cabin, and see me walking away to the sofa. Interlude. Delta Flight, stand by, we're descending. On our signal, the target is at a depth of 10 kilometers. Shoot while we're entering the atmosphere. Shuttle 1, you understood. Are you sure, Commander?
Ivanova glanced sideways at Sinclair, who was at that moment intently checking the shuttle's instrument readings and preparing it for re-entry into the atmosphere.
I'm sure, Lieutenant. The man smiled, and having grabbed the steering wheel more comfortably, directed the ship downwards with a sharp turn. "Commander!" Ivanova cried. "Missiles! Delta fire!"
At the same moment, the Babylon fighters, hanging in high orbit, opened aimed fire downwards, destroying the missiles launched by the anti-aircraft defense system as they approached, and knocking off its targeting device from the shuttle.
I hope Tasaki was right when he said 5 miles deep.
Why?
There was serious tension in the lieutenant's voice, and the woman's gaze was riveted to the instrument panel and the sensor readings.
We'll need at least 2 miles to break, Sinclair replied, optimistically. If we don't crash into anything, of course.
It's about time, Commander. It's about damn time to think about this. Everything will be fine, Ivanova.
It's not the first time at the helm. There was no time for further conversation because the shuttle dived into the black abyss of the crevice, and Sinclair, turning on powerful searchlights, tried to slow the ship down, go around all the protruding rocks around.
The scanners are clear. There are only rocks around, Commander. There must be something there. We haven't gone down to the end yet. I hope Tasaki was right. It would be very stupid if we flew here. Wait, Commander.
There's something there?
Where? 2 kilometers down. There, in the rock. I think it's a lock. Yes, that's right, it's a lock. Let's go in.
Having got his bearings, Sinclair led the shuttle in the direction indicated by the lieutenant, where a ring of illumination around the hole in the rock was indeed visible.
After passing through a short corridor, they found themselves in a large cavern, in which several landing pads were mounted, similarly illuminated around the perimeter.
What's outside?
Gravity 0.75 Earths. Ivanova brought up the readings on the display. The atmosphere is 90% carbon dioxide. We can't do without breathing masks. Signs of life? None. It seems we are the only living beings here.
Which is not surprising, the woman sighed.
Okay, then it's time to go outside. Armed and wearing masks, the men headed toward the shuttle's exit.
It was quite cool outside, and everything around indicated that the complex had been abandoned for a long time, hundreds if not thousands of years.
But, surprisingly, it did not give the impression of being out of order. The walls were lit up by steady panels of indicators with inscriptions in an unknown language. And along one of the walls, there was a row of crystals that vaguely reminded
Jeffrey Sinclair of elements of Minbari computers.
Although these crystals were larger and more ancient. Looks like we're not the first guests here. Look, Commander, came the muffled voice of a woman from behind the mask, pointing a flashlight beam at the far corner of the hangar where an alien ship stood, leaning on one side. Judging by the condition of the outer covering, which was covered in extensive rust spots, it had been there for a monstrously long time. Even with the naked eye, it was obvious to Sinclair that this trough would not only not fly, but you couldn't even go into it, so as not to risk something heavy falling on your head. It's been here for a long time. But it looks like it's not the owner's material of the walls, floor and other structures. Completely clean, no traces of the passing of time, except for dust. And this one is almost completely rusted. Clearly a less advanced technology. And here it looks like are the owners. Sinclair pointed the flashlight a little further at the body lying on the floor. Due to the specific atmosphere, the almost complete absence of microorganisms and the cold, the corpse had practically turned into a mummy, having shrunk more than decomposed. Although the lack of a helmet or breathing mask on it made one wonder. It's not clear. Maybe he suffocated. Look, Commander, he's not wearing a helmet, a breathing mask, or anything. I can't even imagine what kind of organism could breathe carbon dioxide. Well, except for plants. Well, yes, the man said thoughtfully, but I don't see any leaves or twigs on it. Let's be careful, you never know what killed it. And here's another one. A couple dozen meters later, Ivanova stopped again, pointing the flashlight down. Stop. And here, the cause of death is obvious. Look, Commander.
Sinclair, stopping right next to the lieutenant, squatted down. By the wall, leaning against the beam supporting the ceiling, half sitting, was the same alien as the one seen earlier.
But in this case, he clearly did not die of natural causes. The burned hose in his chest spoke of this quite clearly. Sinclair pointed the flashlight down the corridor ahead.
I don't like this corridor. I really don't like it.
Do you think there's a trap here?
I don't know. But something is definitely wrong here. Let's check.
The man picked up a small stone from the floor, which had once fallen from the stone ceiling, and, throwing it in his hand, he casually threw it forward into the corridor.
As soon as the stone touched the floor for the first time, a multitude of laser beams struck from the loopholes hidden in the walls, crossing out the entire space between the ceiling and the floor for about 10 meters.
Reacts to pressure on the floor? Ivanova suggested, shuddering slightly and involuntarily taking a step back.
Let's check again, the commander, calculating something in his mind, picked up several stones at once, and, standing next to the lieutenant, took aim at the corridor. And then one!
The stone flew a little further than before, but it repeated the fate of its predecessor. Having barely touched the floor, the piece of rock activated the trap, and the laser beams added scorch marks to the walls. 1, 2, 3, 4. The man threw the stone forward again, with the same result. 1, 2, 3, throw! And nothing happened. The stone fell and remained lying on the floor approximately in the middle of the corridor. 3 seconds. Ivanov looked at Sinclair in surprise. The trap reloads in 3 seconds? It looks like it. Look, 10 meters away, the walls are already clean. Shall we run there? I think so, sir. Then be ready. I throw.
The last stone flew forward, triggering the trap, and Sinclair began to count.
2 Babylon officers rushed forward, trying to get away from the corridor's firing zone, without noticing the spider, dimly gleaming with silver metal right under the ceiling, which had been watching what was happening all this.
Второй занятием сознес. Мы видео.
Cats are good. Cat lover. And yet they did it. The station commander and his deputy, personally, they flew to the planet below, without support or any plan, just at random.
Damn it, I thought that this kind of thing really only happens in old space operas about the valor, pathos, and overcoming of brave earthly space pilots over the adversities of the unknown universe. However, some rudiments of common sense were clearly present in the commander. Since an official report about the technology discovered on the planet and the existing problems was still sent to Earth. Commander and Ivanova, after wandering around the passages below for some time, finally reached the center room where the operator of the great machine lived. Moreover, as far as it was noticeable from the information coming from the younger ones, the alien practically led them by the hand to himself, having turned off all the internal traps after the first one, and coordinatedly closed the necessary doors.
In the passages.
Otherwise, as far as I know the map of the complex's passages below, people could only spend a couple of years looking for an exit from the hangar, not to mention getting into the very heart of the structure. Lord Baal? Ambassador Delen's voice came from the door after the beep. Madam Ambassador? I give the command to open the door and stand to greet the Minbari. To what do I owe your visit?
Zelen and another Minbari entered the cabin with the usual welcoming bow, looking around the furnishings of my quarters with curiosity and some surprise.
Considering their penchant for almost asceticism, the Goa'uld-style interior should create a strong impression. Allow me to introduce Lord Baal. The lens smiled. This is my old teacher, mentor and friend, Draal. He has arrived on the Babylon for a friendly visit, and I am giving him a tour of the station. Zelen, the future operator of the great machine, smiled broadly. You always introduce me as if my visit is at least an official request from someone from the Grey Council. I can't visit my student anymore. I beg your pardon. The Minbari was slightly embarrassed. Ciao, this is Lord Baal, ambassador of the intergalactic Goa'uld Empire.
I've heard a lot about you, the man bowed his head politely, and even more about your unusual assistant. Although I am not sure that all these rumors can be true. I hope we haven't distracted you from anything important.
Not at all, I smile, looking at Draal with a searching gaze in response. It is a great honor for me to meet Ambassador Delen's mentor. The future neighbor from the planet below was old. Or rather, he didn't look old and tired of life, although in reality, as far as I know from the Babylon medical database on the Minbari, the man was still quite far from old age. So the problem was either illness, or more likely, the difficult trials that befell him in recent years,
which force him to rethink his life path and become disillusioned with its current direction. Curious. And Delenn, it turns out, with such acquaintances, not only shows her mentor what she has achieved and how she lives here, but also tries to stir him up, retaining Drell's interest in further life. Yes, perhaps the great machine and the great goal will come in handy in this matter. And I wondered why he suddenly clung to the opportunity to become a spare part, having essentially lost the ability to leave this corner of space in the flesh.
And how do you like Babylon? I politely invite the guest to sit on the sofa, walking towards the kitchen corner.
Korone's passion for sweets was already beginning to seem like a stupid joke, but nevertheless, in my cabin, there was always an impressive supply of various baked goods and sweets, as well as several types of tea or its analogues widely sold in the Lawlia's Westbook.
Stations, trade sector, is a noisy place. Drell shook his head disapprovingly, exchanging glances with Delenn.
Although perhaps it's not such a disadvantage, I'm just used to something a little different.
I understand, I nod, placing a tray with 3 cups and a plate of cookies on the table. But such a place, in my opinion, characterizes the Earth, Commonwealth, in an extremely positive way. Alas, Delenn handed one of the cups to a friend, with dignity, taking the second one herself. Even though this may sound arrogant, but without the careful diplomatic work of Minbar after the war, people, the field,
would not have thought about building such a station anytime soon.
The main thing is that you think about it, I shrugged.
Tell me, Lord Baal.
Drell hesitated during his words. How is the situation in your empire? I raised an eyebrow questioningly.
A state entity like yours, which occupies such a vast territory, the Minbari took a sip of tea, must have great difficulty maintaining order and sanity in remote corners. And if you continue to expand your borders, of course, I nod, the
question of including new territories or new species into the empire is quite complicated.
Many civilizations are not developed enough to join, others do not want it themselves. Over the millennia of history of the Goa'uld Empire, we have managed to work out a fairly reliable scheme that does not allow the state to fall apart. I hope my curiosity is not too intrusive.
Don't worry, I smile. A conversation over a cup of tea is not the worst way to shirk boring ambassadorial duties, especially since Korone copes with many of them very well herself.
And how do you determine who is worthy of joining the Empire and who is not?
Oh, there are a huge number of parameters that a candidate must meet. A lot of conditions.
At first glance, they can be greatly generalized to understand whether a civilization is worth paying attention to at all.
The most obvious one, I stroke my beard, leaning back in my chair, is the requirement of the absence of internal strife.
It is impossible to build any agreements with a species if the species cannot come to an agreement with itself.
I understand. Drell nodded, clearly thinking hard about something. There were periods in our history when different parts of our people thought more about immediate gain and personal well-being than about society. I think, I smile encouragingly, everyone in our universe goes through this. The main thing is to overcome this shortcoming before it destroys civilization. The same can be said about the so-called desire to assert oneself. I take a small croissant from the plate on the table and put it in my mouth.
If we talk about the essence, then the desire to capture and own resources, as well as the desire to visibly rise above others. These are all components of the instinct of self-preservation, formed at the dawn of the formation of civilization itself. In conditions when the mind is just forming and the species is constantly forced to fight for existence, only individuals with a certain set of, so to speak, behavioral patterns undergo natural selection. Gradually, these patterns take root in the gene code and become innate instincts. And at the first stages of civilization development, they are really useful, as they help the carriers to survive and succeed where an individual deprived of them would fail. Korone, who sat down on the sofa with the tablet in her hands, pushed a cup of tea towards me, and I accepted it with a grateful nod. The problems begin later. Namely at the moment when civilization reaches a level that allows it to overcome the natural shortage of resources and the dangers of the environment. This must be a very advanced civilization, Delenn noted cautiously. Not at all. I take a sip of tea. In fact, as a rule, this line has overcome back in the era of steam engines, but
I snap my fingers. This is where the problems dictated by outdated behavioral patterns begin to appear. Having resources, with the optimal use of which a civilization is capable of fully providing any member of society with everything necessary, it begins to create an artificial deficit, since the most successful members of this society are unable to overcome the instincts that led them to success, and with all their might begin to build a management system that would satisfy these very instincts with maximum efficiency.
In other words, resources are withdrawn from general access and appropriated by those who most clearly express the desire to visibly rise above others, even despite the fact that this is no longer required for either personal survival or the survival
of the species. Resources become not a tool but an end in themselves. Like a drug that was originally developed to ease the condition of patients during a difficult operation, and then began to be used only for the feeling of euphoria that it brings, stimulating certain chemical reactions in the body.
I think Dral exchanged glances with Delenn. I understand what you mean. And how is this overcome?
Curiously, Dral seemed genuinely interested in the conversation, perking up and even brightening up a bit, while Delenn just sat there, sipping tea and smiling at something. Are they really using me as a psychoanalyst? I wanted they came to me straight away after Mimbari went through the other ambassadors first. I can just imagine Kosh in my place. Or Londo. Brrr. There are different methods to achieve such a volume of resources that even artificial methods will not be able to isolate society from them. The option is very long and unreliable. Instincts themselves die very slowly besides. There is always the danger of catastrophes that can deprive civilization of abundance, and then the old behavioral patterns will wake up again. Another way is to consciously eradicate from oneself the traits that have become negative by means of a mass education program and the creation of such a form of control system that will not allow those in whom the said instincts are most clear expressed to achieve success. By the way, on Earth, not so long ago they tried to go this way, but made several serious mistakes. In particular, they misunderstood what exactly needed to be fought. As a result, the carriers of harmful paradigms quickly adapted, rose to the top of the system and reset its work. The attempt failed. Also, as far as I can judge, Mimbar is now also following this path, and quite successfully. I give the guests a respectful bow. What methods are there? The Mimbari, represented by Delenn, asked, looking at each other again. Direct interference in the gene code, for example. I shrug. It is a risky business. Sometimes such experiments lead to the death of a civilization. But if you observe the proper level of caution and foresight, then the result can be achieved most quickly. With qualities, however, it is more difficult. I take another sip. By eradicating harmful behavioral paradigms, you can accidentally touch something necessary. However, it would take too long to list them, but if we talk in general, then joining the Empire itself is not limited to just two options. Yes or no. A species can be promising in its development, but have taken a wrong turn. In such cases, we sometimes allow ourselves to offer its representatives our help. Include them in the Empire as a vessel, so that later, when they are ready, we can give them an informed choice. So, Dylan jumped up with some tense surprise. In some cases you, how can I say, elevate the species, engage in what humans would call progressivism. There are many more nuances, but yes, you could say that. I know. A few technologies there, a couple of hints here, and now you can see a qualitative leap in development, on the threshold of which they had been trampling for a couple of centuries. Of course, such a credit of trust does not always justify itself. I sigh with a bit of sadness. From the most recent, I can recall two species that did not benefit from our help. They were unable to finally solve their internal problems, and in the end, practically destroyed themselves. A mission failure, I shake my head, no matter how you look at it, must. I've heard rumors, the Mimbari woman said tensely, that you've allegedly given the Earth Commonwealth a gift in the form of some kind of technology. It turns out, no, I allow myself to laugh, Ambassador Delenn, it was my personal initiative. It's just that ships with such imagination creating such beautiful works of art
And to make such terrible ships?
They lack grace, and yet they have wonderful examples before their eyes. For example, you. I bow slightly to both interlocutors. Or those same Narns. I hope my question will not seem too immodest to you, but the man paused. You look so much like a human. I would be extremely curious to know how this is even possible. A coincidence, I suppose. I shrug. On the other hand, considering the age difference between our species, the question of who resembles whom is rather funny. If I continue the thought, then between me and the human there are many times more differences than similarities. Our species originated in a completely different galaxy, respected Dral, and has evolved over many millions of years.
Like any civilization known to you, our history contains ups and downs, long periods of peace and development, but also periods of destructive wars and catastrophes. All of this has affected us, just as it affects you.
If we move on to specifics, I poured tea for the guests from a small teapot. Then we lived for quite a long time, possessing excellent adaptability to the surrounding conditions. For example, although I drink this wonderful drink with you and get great pleasure from the process, I do not need food or air at all, and frankly, I do not know of any disease that could somehow harm representatives of my species.
A tense silence reigned in the cabin, and the Minbari exchanged uncertain glances.
Not every question deserves an answer, right? I wonder if they won't suddenly start considering me a god here. No, it's unlikely, of course, but shock is our way, definitely. For example, I don't know if the Vorlons and Shadows eat anything.
Well, that is... They seem to be ancient races. I vaguely remember that the Vorlons are semi-energy beings. But do they need to eat? Breed? After all, their spacesuits are more of a disguise than a necessity.
And here's someone like me. Openly declares that he doesn't eat, drink or breathe, but sits right here, next to me, and calmly chats over a cup of tea. Interlude. The commander's shuttle has passed the security perimeter, sir. Excellent. Garibaldi breathed a sigh of relief, tensely watching what was happening with Sinclair and Ivanova, according to the readings of the station's sensors and scanners. Make sure that... Incoming funnel! The dispatcher cut him off.
Let them wait until they get out. We'll take the shuttle out of turn, sir. The big ship. What? Garibaldi brought up the decoding of the incoming ship's signal of the screen. The hell?
A heavy cruiser of the Earth Commonwealth. Babylon 5 calling cruiser. What do you want? We didn't ask for help. I know, Babylon 5. A dashing dark-skinned man appeared on the display. Obviously the captain of the arriving ship. But you will still receive assistance. I am Alice Pierce, captain of the cruiser Hyperion of the Earth Space Fleet. I am assuming command. Stand by, Babylon, and receive us. Pierce hung up, leaving Garibaldi outraged by such impudence and insolence. How I hate days like these, the man sighed heavily, massaging his temples. Give the Hyperion a corridor and organize the reception of guests, but only after the commander sits down with Ivanova. Yes, sir, the operator's fingers ran over the keys. Jeff will be very unhappy, Michael muttered under his breath, glancing at the still distant cruiser, and quickly left the bridge. The commander's shuttle was supposed to arrive at the station only a little earlier than the Hyperion, but there should have been enough time to warn Sinclair and give him the opportunity to prepare for the meeting. And all because of damn bureaucracy. Garibaldi never understood it and couldn't stand it.
And now, the results of the station's sensors, which included telemetry from the ships that were rescuing the hapless scientist-archaeologist, automatically went into the scheduled report, which Sinclair simply could not help but send to Earth.
Well, how could he not? He could, of course, as well as correct any moments in it. But who could have imagined that such a fuss would arise because of the planet below? Commander. Garibaldi managed to intercept Sinclair just as he was walking from the medical bay towards his cabin. What else happened, Michael? The man sighed wearily, unbuttoning the top button of his jacket. I saw a cruiser approaching the station. Who else was there? This is Hyperion. Pierce? What does he... Wait. Sinclair's face reflected a doomed understanding of the upcoming fun.
He has Earth's Commonwealth military cruiser near a diplomatic station. The council will raise an outcry. Garibaldi only grimaced in response, quickly following the commander. He had not yet considered the situation from this point of view.
Somehow he had missed this nuance, evaluating the ship's arrival from the position of a crowd of brave soldiers who had not seen civilization for months, and who, given free rein, could only get drunk in a pub and pester every female they met, was slightly prettier than a Kikimora. But there was another side. Babylon was a kind of neutral waters, a station built with Minbari money by the hands of Earth, although it actually belonged to the Earth's Commonwealth, but by all notions of international space law it was neutral territory. And therefore, any entry into this system by a military ship of any race was considered an act of aggression, and if not a reason to start a war, then at least an excellent topic for a juicy scandal. Yes, there were exceptions to this rule, but they came into force either after extensive ritual diplomatic dances or in the event of damage to the arriving ship requiring urgent repairs. And something told me that there was no hint of any of these options. I'll talk to the captain. Sinclair buttoned his jacket again, trying to make it look more presentable. And you and Ivanova, please notify the council and the league, so that there are no misunderstandings. Most likely they'll want to hold a talk shop, but at least this way we won't get into a scandal. They will demand participation in the research of our discovery. Probably, the man winced as he entered the open elevator doors. But let the ministers have a headache about that. I'll do it, Garibaldi nodded, turning towards another elevator. It's cozy here, Pierce chuckled contentedly, turning from the screen on which advertising information about the station was playing towards the commander who had entered. Comfortable, like home. There's even a garden. My crew wouldn't hurt to rest. I have read your order, Captain Pierce. Sinclair's face showed that he was not at all happy about the military man's presence. But it doesn't explain anything, it only confuses. We were heading to Vega when a signal came from the space fleet. Headquarters. The order was to come to the Babylon and take command. Whose order? The Bureau of Planetary Security. They reported your discovery on Epsilon 3. Perhaps we are talking about a revolution in technology. Just think what scientific and military prospects this opens up for Earth. Oh, yes, the commander grimaced skeptically. Excellent prospects. Captain Pierce, I couldn't help but send an official message home. And you understand that. But I assure you we can handle it ourselves. Now perhaps, Pierce smiled, but this is a neutral sector, and all galactic states can equally claim rights to the planet. What will you do if a non-cruiser suddenly emerges near the station? And Minbari? It is my duty to ensure that priority for research remains assigned to Earth, to delay foreign search parties and to protect you when the aliens realize what exactly you have found here and that we are not going to share with them. Do you even know what the situation is fraught with? I know, Sinclair grumbled discontentedly, that the situation remained under control until you brought your flying battle iron here. Baal did not say this then, but Sinclair was sure that this was the epithet that was read in the look of the Goa'uld ambassador. And now questions cannot be avoided. You were the first to fly into the neutral sector on a military ship. A demonstration of strength and seriousness of our intentions is necessary, Commander Sinclair. Now that we are here, provocations from our neighbors will be less likely. What is the condition of the prisoner? The patient, the man emphasized the word with his voice, is in the medical bay, unconscious. Scare him, maybe a show of force will solve the problems with his condition.
Commander, this is not a Stone Age frontier world. The commander whose patience was running out abruptly interrupted Pierce. Where it is enough to flex your muscles, show a big gun, and everyone will line up. This is a diplomatic facility.
Neutral motherfucking territory. You can't act here by storm. Do you want a repeat of the story with the Drezzies? No matter how brave Pierce was, he could only flex his jaw and wait for Sinclair to say something else in response to such a rebuke. Yes, de jure the captain's rank was higher, but he was a quote simple army officer. And the commander commanded the largest, the most important facility of the Earth Commonwealth. Yes, now Pierce could insist and demand that the command order be followed, but he would also have to deal with all the consequences of such a step. and the captain of the Hyperion did not want to get involved in politics. And Sinclair could arrange extremely unpleasant problems for him. In response, "We don't need that kind of help. Enjoy your comfort. Let your people rest. And I'll try to make sure your visit here doesn't drag on too long."
That's all I have, Captain Pierce.
The man continued to glare at the commander for a few more seconds, then turned around abruptly and walked quickly out of the office, leaving Sinclair alone.
The commander sank tiredly into a chair, closing his eyes. The only thing he needed now was Pierce.
And so, if the council members found out about what was happening on the planet below, he, Sinclair, would have to answer endless questions and ultimatums. And if all this was accompanied by an Earth warship hanging over his soul...
In fact, the commander was extremely surprised that the funnels around the station had not yet opened, from which the ships of the same Minbari or Centauri emerged, and Lord Baal. Oh, how I really want to go on vacation.
Rubbing his face with his palms wearily, Sinclair straightened up, pulled his uniform down, and giving his face the most collected expression possible, dialed a number on the communication terminal.
"Hello, Senator Hidoshi." The commander bowed his head respectfully. "I hope I haven't disturbed you too much."
"Good afternoon, Commander." The Asian smiled slightly. "I'm at my workstation, so a call from the commander of the diplomatic station
Can't distract me. Did something happen to you?
Captain Pierce," the man said gloomily, sighing.
"Yes, I know about this order from the command." Hidoshi shook his head sadly.
"I suppose he has already arrived at the Babylon. I just had the displeasure of talking to him."
I'm sorry, Commander, but the decision to send him to you was made at the highest level, and I personally can hardly do anything.
"Understand," the senator sighed. "Since the war with Maybar, the space fleet has been simply obsessed with finding new technologies that could give Earth an advantage. Now that such a chance has arisen..."
Senator, when I took office, the president personally confirmed that
"In this sector, my word is law. I will not hand over command to the military without the president's direct order."
As you yourself said, this is a diplomatic station, not a military one.
The president is currently busy with the uprising on Mars. The commander, the entire government is already in a fever. These are your problems, Senator.
I have my own problems, bigger than the Martian Olympus.
In short, Sinclair narrowed his eyes stubbornly. "Until I receive an official order confirming Pierce's authority, the sector remains under my jurisdiction."
And if the captain even thinks about doing something that would jeopardize the neutrality of the station, I will drop him on Epsilon 3 in a spacesuit and let him defend the planet personally.
And if you don't like it, then I will simply resign and do whatever you want here.
"Okay, Commander. Don't get worked up. I'll try to get an explanation of the situation. But for now, I'll ask Captain Pierce to agree to a division of powers."
Senator, Commander, this is all I can do, understand?
But
until next time, Commander Sinclair. That's all for now.
To their credit, Delenn and Droll digested the information they had received rather quickly, pulling themselves together and continuing their small talk as if nothing had happened. Or maybe it was a question of their facial expression control skills. In any case, no more particularly shocking topics were brought up in the conversation, especially since Droll was genuinely interested in almost everything that could be learned about the new race that had suddenly appeared on the territory of a conversation. Seemingly long-known part of the galaxy. "Thank you very much, Lord Baal, for taking the time to have this pleasant conversation."
Delenn bowed politely, standing up.
"Yes, it was a very informative conversation, and I hope that we can repeat it sometime. If, of course." Droll hesitated slightly. "It is not a burden to you." "Oh," I smile. "Not at all, Droll."
"Madame Ambassador," I bow in return, "I, like you, was very pleased to converse with educated and pleasant to talk to intelligent people."
"Good day, Lord Baal." The Minbari bowed again and left my cabin.
An absolutely irrational way of exchanging information.
Korone nodded at the default speech, twitching her ear in displeasure. "Besides, it was uninformative." "I thought," I raised an eyebrow, "that you, of all people, should have appreciated the appeal of tea and baked goods if you weren't happy with the conversation itself."
"Baking is different."
Neka turned away with an indignant look, grabbing another cookie from the plate. The girl's ears, which were sticking out with interest as she waited for my answer, added a special piquancy to the moment.
And Danica could not help but understand the fact that her own statements contradicted her own actions.
Yes, that's what I thought. With a slight smile, I watched the demonstrative dissatisfied girl enthusiastically crunching on the treats and thoughtfully stroke my beard. It was time to give some instructions to the younger ones, especially since Goa'uld and Yutani had worthily fulfilled their obligations and the ordered cargo of vegetation and animals for a private landscape park had already been sent to Babylon 5, where my own ship would pick it up and take it to the territory of the Empire. The main thing was to remember to carefully check the contents of the containers for life forms not included in the order. Yes, don't forget. The terminal on the table beeped softly, indicating an incoming message. And then the signal of an incoming video call was heard. Good afternoon, Mr. Garibaldi. I nod with a smile to the head of security. Is something wrong with you?
Good afternoon, Lord Baal, Garibaldi answered with a tired sigh. So far, thank God, nothing has happened. Commander Sinclair has asked to convene the council today. I hope you will be able to attend. Thank you for the invitation, I'll come.
Excellent. The Manavan smiled slightly. I sent you the agenda for review. Yes, the meeting will be at 1800 station time. No problem, Mr. Garibaldi, I nod again, I'll come. Michael said a crumbled goodbye and hung up. It's interesting that the council meeting is clearly connected to the appearance of an Earth warship at the station.
It looks like Sinclair has decided to push the solution to this problem entirely onto the diplomatic sector of the government, notifying representatives of all states. I definitely approve.
The probability of provocation from the League of Non-Aligned Worlds is 68.543%. The most likely source is the Drazi race. Korone put her teacup aside for a moment. As always, I shrug.
And Vorlon, as always, will remain silent if Kosh shows up to the meeting at all. You should have claimed the device as your own long ago. Now it may become difficult to study.
I don't think so. The operator will change in any case and everything will return to normal. The great machine itself is interested in maintaining the status quo.
Korone snorted skeptically, again demonstratively turning away and twitching her ears in a gesture of protesting displeasure. What about your standard phrase that I am irrational, unbearable, and illogical? You know very well yourself.
There is no need to repeat myself. Nothing has changed.
Interlude. Ambassador Kosh refused to attend. He approached Commander Garibaldi. Everyone else is already assembled. As always, thank you, Michael. Nodding, the head of security stood in his usual pace by the wall, leaning his back against it with a lazy look. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Sighing wearily, Sinclair glanced at those present and rose from the table.
Thank you for agreeing to come.
You are quite persistent, Commander Sinclair. The Centauri ambassador saluted the man with his cup. Besides, this is at least some variety in the boring routine of the last few days.
Londo!
Delen looked at him disapprovingly. I'm sure the commander didn't call us all together for your entertainment. You read the list of questions. We read. Something about a planet below, but I didn't get into it. There were some murmurs of disapproval from the assembled League ambassadors at this disregard for their duties, but for the most part everything was surprisingly quiet. Please continue, Commander. Thank you. As you may have read in the files transmitted to you, a high-tech device of an unknown civilization was discovered on the planet below. Since Babylon 5 is in a neutral sector of space, I considered it necessary to officially inform the representatives of the races present here.
Commander Sinclair,
the displeased voice of the Drazi ambassador rang out.
Your words are somewhat at odds with the fact that a military cruiser of the Earth Commonwealth has been hanging around the station for several hours now.
Unfortunately, that's quite logical, Jikar said phlegmatically. The structure below was discovered by people, so it's not surprising that their government decided to take out insurance. But this is neutral territory. The commander just said so himself. Let's calm down, Ambassador Abai spoke up. The Drazis are protesting. If Earth can bring ships here, we can do the same. If you've found some kind of device here, it should be available for everyone to study.
There may be some difficulties with this.
Ivanova shook her head.
I don't see any problems, smiled Lord Baal, sitting on a separate chair away from the ambassadors, with an independent look, as always.
Lord Baal? Sinclair was eager to take the opportunity to distract those around him from the escalating scandal. The Goa'uld Empire is not interested in this planet, and the machine in its depths. We already examined it when we arrived at Babylon.
At your level of technology, studying it is not possible, even with the operator's permission. And without it, the planet will simply self-destruct soon, together with the station, which is typical. So if they want, let them try.
But Lord Baal, how did you even know about the existence of the machine below? Didn't you know about her? No? Ivanova exchanged confused glances with Sinclair.
I thought you built Babylon here precisely because of this machine.
The ambassador stroked his beard with a slightly surprised look.
Did you study the system in which you plan to place the international diplomatic station?
We studied it, but the planet looked completely uninhabited.
Delenn exchanged a puzzled glance with the commander, clearly feeling rather uncomfortable about the question herself.
Even to Mimbari scanners, it was just a dead planetoid with an atmosphere unsuitable for life.
Oh, right. I always forget about our difference in technology.
Baal winced with annoyance.
Do you think that's why Kosh misses all the meetings? He turned to his assistant, who stood calmly behind his left shoulder.
He must have the same problem. I'll have to try it. Now the Goa'uld was clearly talking to himself.
Lord Baal, with your irresponsible behavior, you put those around you in an awkward position.
However, as always, the girl answered neutrally without changing her face at all, tilting one of her ears.
That's what I'm talking about. The ambassador enthusiastically supported her.
Wouldn't it be great if I didn't come to such meetings? I'm sure everyone will be happy. And now you are publicly trying to shirk your responsibilities. The movement of the ear was repeated, although not a single muscle on Korone's face moved.
Okay, don't grumble so much. Baal shook his head with a heavy sigh and returned his gaze to the meeting.
If I may say so, I would advise you to resolve the issue with the operator to eliminate the possibility of self-destruction and leave everything as it is.
The machine has been waiting there for 3,000 years. Without giving itself away, it will wait a couple more.
Thank you for your opinion, Lord Baal, Sinclair said, pulling himself together, catching himself thinking that the movements of the Goa'uld representative's assistant's ears carried much more emotional and meaningful weight than might seem at first glance.
I think The Drazi ambassador rose from the table indignantly, and without saying a word, quickly left the council chamber. I suppose that was expected, Garibaldi grumbled.
The fighters must be on constant alert in case of provocation from the League members. Delenn assured me that she can keep the council members from making any sudden moves, but she cannot answer for everyone else.
I'll keep an eye on it, Ivanova nodded, following the commander onto the Babylon's bridge.
Telios.
But if those same Drazi bring cruisers here, the fighters won't be able to do much against them. For this case we have Pierce, who wanted to fight so much, so let him provide security. Tell him, Commando Sinclair.
One of the operators suddenly jumped up.
We have an incoming funnel. Goa'uld, identification signal received. What the hell is this?
Ivanova, feeling a chill down her spine, glanced sideways at the terminal, which displayed the parameters of the arriving ship. He said that the Empire was not interested in the planet. But yes, remembering Lord Baal's habit of driving various giants to the station, the dimensions of the ship, the operator began to report, are about 700 meters in diameter. The mass is not read. The power-to-weight ratio is unknown.
Commander, we are receiving an incoming call.
He's small? Ivanov almost screamed. Commander? Yes. Take it to the terminal. Welcome to Babylon 5, the diplomatic international station. How?
Another girl with cat ears on her head looked at Sinclair from the screen. How can I help you? My name is Yuki. I am the second Archon of the New Territories. Lord Baal, I suppose, judging by your surprise, neither he nor Korone reported my arrival?
The girl froze for a moment, lowering her light ash ears and, having calmed down, quietly sighed.
I offer my sincere apologies for such irresponsible behavior of the ambassador and my sister. Will you allow me to come on board? If my arrival has disrupted your schedule,
No need to apologize. Sinclair could only bow politely and signal to the operator. We'll easily find a place for you in the schedule. Thank you. Nika bowed in response, disconnecting the connection. Now an Archon, right?
Ivanova scratched her head, slightly surprised. The main thing is that the Drazis don't arrive.